The anterior upper thigh involves the iliopsoas, which are the hip flexors, and the quadriceps, which is also responsible for hip flexion and knee extension. And the ones that we're going to be most concerned with today in some of these exercises are the hip flexors, the iliopsoas, the iliacus, and the psoas muscle. And the reason is that these muscles are overused a lot for some of us, and they have a direct result on how they affect the lower back, because the psoas muscle and the iliacus both are attached to the upper part of the femur here in the front for hip flexion, but it's where they attach into the other part of the body that has the effect of the lower back. The psoas attaches to the last 5 lumbar vertebrae of the spine. It's a cable that actually goes through the body and attaches back in here to the facets of the lumbar vertebrae. And the iliacus attaches to the base of the pelvis. So they work a little bit differently in terms of what they do. But it's because of the psoas muscle that attaches to the lumbar is what we're going to see how it affects them being able to sit up tall in a seated position, or whether the hip flexors are strong enough to do that, or they're too tight, or whether they're causing problems in terms of the roll down and the roll up. Oh. We're going to see that. So again, we're going to put a little bit more emphasis on the psoas today. And then the posterior upper thigh are the hamstrings. It's responsible for knee flexion and hip extension. And we're going to see these muscles fire when we do single leg kick and double leg kick. So it's a muscle that we have to address, because we talked about this. They're going to be sometimes tight but weak with some of our clients. And that'll show up when we do these kicks as to whether they're really working from the hamstring, or are they just passive and working from just kicking from the knee flexion into the buttock muscle. So know that these are going to be involved in some of these hip back extension work. The outer thigh involves the gluteus medius and the tensor fasciae latae. And these muscles are responsible for hip abduction, movement away from the body. And they're also great to work with internal rotation work. So when you've got clients or students in your class that have that problem of always turning out, it's great to be able to work sideline muscles here, sideline exercises for them to really focus on the tensor fasciae latae and the gluteus medius and the minimus here to strengthen that leg so that it's able to return back into balance position. Because some of these exercises, again, are redressing the muscular imbalances as opposed to the structural imbalance. And we've got the inner thigh, the hip adductors, and there's actually 4 of them. We've always said in group fitness, in terms of group primary, we always say, well, all you need to know about is that they're adductors. But there's actually 4 of them in the inner part of the thigh here. And they are the pectineus muscle, and then it goes into the brevis muscle, going longer and longer and larger in size as they attach from the inner groin area to the inside edge of the femur here. So the reason we've included the pectineus is because we want you to move from way at the very top of the inner thigh muscles when we're doing staggered legs, for instance. And you'll see the difference when we cue that as opposed to just bringing the heels together. So again, if you visually see where these muscles are attached to, then you can actually be able to cue these exercises better, because you have a better way of looking at where they're from and what their movers are and what the reason we're moving from at that area of the body. The anterior lower leg is the tibialis anterior, and it's responsible for dorsiflexion. And then the posterior lower leg is the gastrocnemius and the soleus, and it's responsible for plantar flexion. And the reason we've included these, as you know, is that we're going to be asking you to either point or flex in these exercises. The foot is not passive. It's not just sitting there at the end of the leg doing nothing. We want to see that full extension of the foot. We want to see that full plantar flexion. We want to see that full dorsiflexion as much as we can, so that we're moving within that joint and creating more mobility in that joint. You see, when you start to work with clients and your students in your class, that some of your students have no movement in that joint.
Limited range of motion.
Yeah. And we talked about how it's important to include the flexibility and the range of motion in all our exercises. Well, here's a good example of it. And I call it dead feet in the studio, where you ask someone to do plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, and there's not a whole lot of difference. It looks the same.
It looks the same.
Exactly.
Right.
And you're going, no, I want you to point. And they go, yeah, I am.
I am pointing. Right.
Okay, well, let's go to dorsiflexion. Well, let's see. That's not going to move either. So, and you find that they create these issues in the bottoms of their feet because the tendons aren't moving with them.
Right.
So we ask them to do a lot of exercises with their feet using a towel, perhaps, or rolling a tennis ball over the foot to get those tendons to stretch because they're not using them. And it also reduces the risk of plantar fasciitis, which I've noticed in tendinitis, all this itis problems that flare up from not using the feet properly.
Right.
So that's why we've included these muscles here, that it's crucial that we actually see dorsiflexion and plantar flexion in our exercises today. So any questions on any of the movement that we talked about, Lisa, that you can add on?
No, very clear. Thank you.
Good. So we're going to go to a slide, and you're going to see that the anatomy references here. And the reason we've included this is because, again, we're working from the inside out with these muscles. And we want you to see really where these muscles attach. And sometimes we think that the rectus abdominis is only from here to here, like between the top of the pelvis to the lower part of the rib cage. But when you see it as an anatomy chart, you actually see how long this is and how much of it is actually underneath the ribs, and how they attach to the pubic bone, the pubic symphysis, as well as the internal and external obliques and the transverse abdominis, all attached down in there. But if you look at where the internal obliques attach to, they really attach deep underneath the rib cage and to the back of the spine of the pelvis. The external obliques, if you go above that, you see that they actually are more in the front of the body. And then with the transverse abdominis, you can see that that's the deepest layer. So their fibers are going to run horizontal, like Lisa mentioned earlier. They run around the body, and the muscle attaches actually all the way around again to the lumbar area of the back. So it's a compressor. It feels like it's the girdle. It's our girdle, if you look at it that way. It what keeps everything in at that point, because that's the deepest layer of the muscles there. And so if you look at where they attach, it kind of gives you a better understanding of how to explain to your students with imagery cues as to where they should feel the work from. How to bring the bottom of the rib cage to the pelvis using the obliques, not just the rectus abdominis. How to compress and place the navel to the spine when we cue deep exhalation, how to work with the transverse abdominis, because that's where they're working from, here. And then if we go to the erector spinae, again, I explained to you that they're long muscles attached at the very base of the skull and at the top of the iliac spine of the back of the pelvis, the posterior part of the pelvis here. But know that if you took those away, you've got other muscles that are underneath there that are just as crucial as the erector spinae, and those are the little multifidus muscles. Do you know what the multifidus muscles are? They're responsible for also working in conjunction with the erector spinae, and they're smaller muscles that look like a braid. They go from 1 to 3 vertebrae, 2 vertebrae to 4 vertebrae, 3 to 5, and they just sort of braid themselves down on either side of the spine, all the way down to the base of to the top of the pelvis area. And they're responsible for not just for extension, but mostly for rotation. And those muscles are going to come involved with, like for instance, the saw. So they're going to work in conjunction with all the rotators of the body, the obliques and the rectus abdominis. And they're going to kick in when we're doing the spinal rotation. They're also going to kick in as stabilizers when we have you on your side, and we don't want the pelvis to move side to side. That's also your multifidus. They're deeper, and they're not in here. But I'm just giving you these little tidbits of information that are not in the workshop manual so that you can take this home and explore it on your own as well. So the multifidus is in there. And we've also learned through other research that I've taken in workshops strictly with Pilates is that the multifidus works a large part of when you're doing a forced expiration with the transverse. They're also going to be stabilizers and compressors for us. And then we've got the psoas and the iliacus. You can see that the hip flexors, you can see now what I'm talking about, how that psoas muscle attaches to the femur and it goes as a cable to the lower back vertebrae, the lumbar area. So if you can see it that way, then it's easier for you to try to cue someone where to work from and how to feel it in their body, as opposed to just saying, we want your hip flexors to be engaged. And then I love this muscle, the quadratus laborum. It sounds so scientific, like we're in some lab, some lobotomy lab. The quadratus laborum sits even deeper into the back, and their fibers run up and down on the back here, parallel to the erector spinae, and they're attached to the lower part of the rib cage, to the base, to the top of the pelvic area in the back, the posterior part of the iliac crest of the pelvis. And they are also responsible, they are true lateral movers of our body, but it depends on how they're working, because quadratus works in two different ways. If you fix the pelvis and keep it stable, and you move the rib cage down to the pelvis, that's the upper part of the quadratus working with the obliques. If you fix the rib cage and it becomes a hip hiker, it lifts the hip up to the ribs, and that is working on the other end of the quadratus. But today, we're going to be using the quadratus a lot in stabilization when it comes to sideline work. And we're going to talk about that when we break down these exercises. So the quadratus laborum, we're going to talk about this again, but just know that it's very deep, they're very small, and they play a huge role in stabilization for us in these exercises. Is there anything else you can talk about in terms of the anatomy? Because there's such a wealth of information that they can continue to work from besides this slide.
I like the way that you describe the erector spinae. Quite often I think about the muscles are very thick, like tree trunks at the bottom, and as they climb up to the cervical spine, they become thin like narrow branches.
Oh, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, that's how I see it here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Again, I always encourage you as instructors to go out and further your education on anatomy, because it's only going to benefit you when you teach these exercises, that you'll be able to explain to your students where they're moving from and how it works. Kinesiology to me is just a wealth of information that we can use in fitness, period. So if you have the ability to go out and take an anatomy course, or for me, just reading anatomy books. I love anatomy books to look at, and we've got some great anatomy books now that you can work with in terms of DVDs. So
it really helps. It makes the exercises that we do more clear when we know which muscles we are working and their insertions. Mm-hmm. We can visualize it when we're teaching these exercises. We can actually know where the muscles are, where they insert, what they look like.
Right.
It helps. It
how
really
thick
does
they
help.
are, how
That's
thin
right.
they are, how crucial they are in terms of strength and
That's right.
flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
For spinal alignment, we're going to move on, and I'm going to talk about neutral spinal alignment, because that's what we get asked a lot. What is neutral? What is neutral spinal alignment? Well, when we look at the slide that you have in front of you about spinal alignment, you see that we have a natural S-curve to our body when it comes to where we are in space. We have, I'm going to have you come on up and demo
certainly.
for this, because I think it'll make more sense as to how they see it.
All right.
So it's turning sideways. Let's just turn you sideways and then have you pull your hair out so we can see your spine.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't we just go ahead and just bring it up a little bit. Yeah.
Does that help?
Right.
Okay.
So what we have in the spine is we have the cervical area of the spine, which is 7 vertebrae. We have the thoracic area of the spine, which are 12 of our vertebrae. The lumbar is 5, and the sacrum is fused of 3 to 5, I believe, of the bones there. And then we have the cossack, or the tailbone, that points down. And in this alignment, we have this S-curve. And we have, in the cervical area, we have what we call the concave position of the spine, where the spine goes in. Then we have a natural thoracic curvature here, which is called convex, where it comes out. Then we go into the lumbar area, which is concave again. Then the sacrum goes back out a little bit into a convex position, and the tailbone just sits hopefully straight down on us. Some of us actually have a tailbone that sticks under or out. So they're going to have a little bit of problems when they're going rolling up and down on some of these exercises. But you have this area that is neutral, and neutral spine. And the way that we find neutral spine is I usually try to find it from the floor up, because if you place the pelvis in neutral, it puts the lower back in neutral for yourself. And the bony landmarks that I work with in terms of the pelvis being in neutral are the ASIS joint bones here in the front of the pelvis. And if you palpitate your pelvis, everyone can find these bones no matter how thin or heavy they are. They're called the anterior superior iliac spine, the ASIS bones of the pelvis. And they should be pointing in which direction, Lisa?
Forward.
Forward, right? And if you place the pelvis in neutral, where these bones are facing forward, it places the lower back in what would be your neutral spine for the lower back, okay? And then we've got the thoracic here, which has that convex position here, but again, some of us have postural deviations of more winging, and some of us have a little bit more postural deviations of more of a rounded back. But for us, if you pull the rib cage in the front and close this with your abdominals, it'll place the thoracic where it needs to be in terms of in alignment with the lumbar area. Then if you look at where the head sits on the rest of the spine, in conjunction with the cervical placement, the head should have a nice plumb line from ear to shoulder, shoulder to hip. But not all of us can achieve this neutral spine, correct, in everyday life, because we do what? We tend to just relax and let our body just do what it wants to do, right? And so what happens is we start over a period of time, we create these postural deviations in our spine. And we have 3 different deviations that we want to talk about here. We have the first one, which is lordosis, which is excessive curvature, and Lisa's going to go into it, excessive curvature of the lumbar area. The concave position of your lumbar is increased. Then you have kyphosis, which is excessive curvature of the thoracic area. Thank you very much for doing this, because that's a good kyphotic position. But it's excessive curvature of the thoracic area. You've excessively curved go ahead and do this again, the thoracic area. And that, again, we're going to talk about this as to why this is happening. And then you've got scoliosis. So for scoliosis, you may want to show it from the front and the back. It's lateral deviation of the spine, where the spine can go into a C or an S curve, as well as possibly a rotational pull to the spine. So you could also have a rotational in either direction, so you can show it in either direction. And if you look at it from the back, go ahead and turn, you have lateral deviation of the spine. So she's going to go, let's say, right shoulder up higher. Okay, so the C curve is coming here, and then she's going to go into maybe perhaps a little bit of a hip hike on this side here. So you've got what we call a hollow side here and a hollow side here.
Or forward.
Or forward, and that's the rotational pull of the spine. And note that with scoliosis, it's going to be different on everyone. Everyone has different scoliosis. I have scoliosis. I didn't know this until 6 months ago, not even. And I kept wondering why it was that I was having such lower back issues for the last 15 years. We thought it was muscular. I've been going to chiropractors, I've been going to massage therapists, and we finally took an x-ray because I hadn't taken an x-ray since I was in my 20s. And it showed up that I had scoliosis. And if I relax in my posture, you'll see that my left hip lifts here. And I have a little bit of a curvature in my lower back. And that's the scoliosis for me. I don't have an S curve. I have a C curve in my lower back. I've got that hollow side here, which is why whenever I get aches in my back, it transfers to my left side. So I have to constantly think of opening that hip up in order for me to not let those muscles take over. And I work the opposing muscles to hold me up straighter. So for me, it's muscular, probably due to the fact that having done so many years of high-impact aerobics, having competed in aerobics, putting my body through
hard on
my body,
right,
I created this scoliosis.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that you are born with it. Scoliosis can be attributed to injuries, can be attributed to what we do in everyday life, and more people are being diagnosed with scoliosis.
Right.
So let's go back to lordosis, because I think people want to see why it is that we have lordosis in our body. Excessive curvature of the lower back. Lordosis comes from what? What happens here in the lower back, Lisa?
Maybe overdeveloped extensor
muscles.
Weak abdominal muscles.
And what else
feel that
happens here?
Hamstrings.
Hamstrings do. Well, the quadriceps are more developed.
Overdeveloped.
Hip flexors are more developed in order to bring that pelvis, the two bones here together, because if you look at the tilt of the pelvis is no longer sitting in neutral, it's sitting in an anterior tilt. Which means these two bones are coming together. And what moves these bones together? Hip flexors and quadriceps. So there's usually an overdevelopment of the quadriceps and perhaps an overdevelopment or tight hip flexors. So an example of both would be if you did step for years, if you did a lot of spinning, cycling, if you did a lot of kickboxing over the years, you develop these hip flexors and it brings the pelvis to anterior tilt. But also if you have weak obliques, let's say, because the obliques also, if you look at where the abdominals are attached, they're attached to the pelvis. So they're going to have a direct result of how the pelvis sits in neutral. If the obliques are stretched and weak, it allows the pelvis to just fall forward. So a lot of times what I tell people is that it may not have anything to do with the bottom part of the body, of the torso. It could just be that just bringing the torso back in from the obliques will place the pelvis in neutral. If it doesn't do it from there, then we've got other issues that we have to look at in terms of the imbalance of the hip flexors.
There could be a number of things going on.
Right.
Yeah.
But what we're looking at is really what happens to the pelvis and what muscles are affected by that. Well, obviously the hip flexors are affected, the quadriceps are affected. And how do we fix that? Well, probably the best thing to do is do the opposite of what the body's doing. So for someone who has a very lordotic position of the pelvis, great thing for them to do is to do things where they tilt the pelvis back in imprint positions in the exercises.
Strengthen the abdominal muscles.
Strengthen the abdominal muscles. Stretch which muscles?
Hip flexors.
Hip flexors, quadriceps, the ones that are tight. So you stretch, again, the components of flexibility and strength to create a better balanced position of the torso. Now, if we look at kyphosis, it's an over curvature of the thoracic area. You can be born with it. You could also develop it because you're sitting at a desk all day and your shoulders start to immediately rotate in. And what happens here is the muscles back in here become stretched and weak. And so again, we looked at what was responsible for bringing the scapulas together. Which muscles?
Rhomboids.
The rhomboid muscles. So these muscles here have been stretched and weak. So what I do is I emphasize the fact that they need to work on the upper and mid-back part of the torso muscles here, as well as what happens to the front in terms of flexibility. You start to close these muscles here in the front, the pectorals, and the shoulders start to get tight. and flexibility. So we want to stretch these muscles out or move them in the exercises where it involves movement of the arm in extension. Or inflection, inflection, so that you're able to open up the muscles in the front. So again, this is if you're working on one-on-one, this is great. But again, we're trying to create a balance in our class to group setting. So we're going to include all the movement that is responsible for all of these deviations. And then in cervical placement, we just know that this is going to be an area that's going to be weak on most people because of sitting at a desk now. The head starts to fall forward, the muscles become long and weak, and the head weighs about anywhere from 8 to 10 pounds. So if you pick up a 10-pound weight, you can see how heavy the head is and how weak and how small these muscles are actually really in terms of what it supports. So we're going to be working these neck muscles in extension as well as stabilization. And sometimes the best way to work someone back into a neutral position is to work them in stabilization exercises that forces them to hold onto neutral spine. So that is the key for that. So in scoliosis, here's the tricky thing. If they come into your class and you've got someone that has scoliosis, especially the ones that are very evident in terms of how their body is, then they're better off doing work one-on-one, to be honest with you, because they need exercise regimen that is tailored for their needs. I know how to work with mine because it's not severe, and I know what movement bothers it more than others. But know that because they've got one side higher, you're not going to want to move them in that direction to emphasize more of what the body's already doing. You're going to want to do probably a little bit more lateral movement this way so that the muscles that are stretched and strong become strong and short. They don't have weaknesses on either side. Both sides are strong. They're just strong in different ways. The side that's lifted is more strong in an eccentric phase where the muscles are stretched. And the side that's dropped, these muscles are strong in the concentric phase because they're shortening. So we want to do the opposite, strengthen them in concentric phase here, stretch this part up. But then you have to be careful that if they have an S-curve, where is the S-curve and how not to compromise the movement down below, which is why it gets really tricky with scoliosis. Know that they're going to have just a harder time working lateral, for one. Know that because they have a rotation to their spine, that they may not be able to rotate when they're doing the saw to one side because their body's going the other direction. Well, I'm going to tell them if they know where their rotational pull is, don't go there because you don't want to emphasize more the rotational pull that's already happening in their body. You want to go in the opposite direction. So I'm going to say save your rotation to one side only, so that you're not creating more of an imbalance for them. These are just general rules. And again, everyone's going to be different. Some may not even have a rotational pull. I do. I have a rotational pull to the right. So I tend to not do things too much turning my hips to the right, but I fix it and go the other way. Mm-hmm. So again, scoliosis can be brought on by birth, a defect, which happens, and you get diagnosed as usually in your teenage years. It can be brought on by injuries, and it can be brought on by just what we've done in everyday life to it. You can develop scoliosis just because you're holding a muscle imbalance. You're holding everything on the left side. Yeah. You're lifting that shoulder, purse,
diaper bag.
Here's another thing. You see women who have picked up their babies for years on one side of their hip, and they do this while they're cooking or doing stuff, and then they put the kid down and they're going, oh my God, my back hurts. Yeah. Well, and they've created this scoliosis. I've got a couple of my clients that I work one-on-one that have that due to pregnancy and how they hold their babies. So they brought it on themselves. So again, tricky to work with in a group setting. You have to just sort of monitor what they're doing and fix it right away. Mm-hmm. Now, can you add on anything more in the deviations? Or we're going to be covering more of this as we go into the core stabilization exercise part of our
Well, we
workshop.
talked a little bit about kyphosis, and who do you see as far as our population who suffers from kyphosis a little bit more? Maybe
the
older adults.
And
you
know
see a lot of
Yes.
older adults, and we think about the outside of the body being collapsed, but we also have to think about the inside of the body. So when the outside body is collapsed, the internal organs are also compromised and collapsed and might not be functioning as well as they should be. So,
but yeah, you do see the older people who start to look, instead of forward, they start looking at the floor, and that's all they're looking at, and they get that kyphosis happening in them. Now, the other thing that we need to remember is when you put someone that's got kyphosis on the floor, their head's going to tilt back, and we're going to talk about this when we go into the supine positions of the exercises and how to work with kyphosis. Okay? And then we're going to go on to methods for proper spinal alignment, and I'm going to be your demo.
Great.
So I get to just lay here and you can tell me what to do.
All right. Let's turn to page 10. Methods for ensuring proper spinal alignment. And we're going to begin today with the triangle method. Okay. Carlos, we're going to take you to what we refer to as double V position because your legs look a little bit like two V's. All right. So feet are flat on your mat. Knees elevated, very nice. Feet and knees about how wide? Maybe hip width? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Hip width apart, looks good. Now think about spreading the toes apart wide. And you want to press into the toes, the ball of the foot, and the heels equally. So think about all four corners of the feet pressing into the mat. Knees, we don't want them to wing out nor bow in, are hip width apart. Very nice. Now take your hands and reach your fingertips down toward your heels. So it's going to feel as if you're kind of pulling your shoulders down away from your ears as you reach your fingertips down toward your heels.
Okay.
Shoulder blades in contact with your mat, maybe slightly pressed or in contact with your mat would be a good way to put it. Head is aligned with the spine. Okay. There you go.
Can you do that again? Feels good.
Feels good, huh? A little pull there. All right. So the head is aligned with the spine. All right. Now, Carlos, I'd like for you to form a triangle with your hands. And place that triangle on the lower abdomen so that your thumbs are right below the navel. Okay. Okay. Now your triangle should be in what we refer to as frontal plane. So if I were to come by and pour water into that triangle, the water would stay there. If the water runs down toward the feet, we need to adjust Carlos. If the water runs down toward his face, once again, we should adjust. Now I'm going to take my hand, I'm going to show you the three curves here. Curve 1 was, you know it, cervical spine. I can slide my hand underneath his neck. That is curve 1. It is concavely curved. Curve 2, we have the thoracic spine. We want to ensure that the shoulder blades are in contact with the mat. If someone, for instance, maybe has a excessive kyphotic curve, the shoulders might look like this. Exactly. Shoulder blades are not in contact with the mat, right? And the forward head also.
Back.
Okay.
Back.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the chin would be elevated a little bit too high. So there's our curve 2, shoulder blades in contact with the mat. Now curve 3, this is where you may find some deviations here with our third curve. I should be able to take my hand and slide it underneath his back. Yeah, I can move my fingers up and down. I can slide my hand underneath his back. There's a space there. But quite often we see people who don't have that space. And then it would look a little bit like a posterior pelvic tilt. Now the water would run down toward his face. There's no space. I can't slide my hand under. Okay? So we go into a slight anterior pelvic tilt, creating your space. So we have curve 1, curve 2, shoulder blades in contact with the mat. Curve 3, I can slide my hand under, lower lumbar. And curve 4, well, it's in frontal plane. His triangle is a flat surface here. So this would be neutral spine. Okay, very nice. All right. Another way to find neutral spine would be our triangle method. So with, our clock method. That was the triangle method. Our clock method, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So Carlos is going to take his 2 fingers above the navel and 2 fingers below the navel. Let's go to 12 o'clock. All right. So think about rounding your back, spinal flexion. Round your back, kind of push into these fingers here. The back's rounded, the tailbone is elevated. Now arch your back, pressing 6 o'clock. All right, arching the back. I can probably slide 2 to 3 hands under his back now. Go back to 12 o'clock. Go back to 6 o'clock. Okay. Now, I'd like for you to feel equal tension between both areas, 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, pressing equally. That's going to help Carlos define neutral spine. You're going to be feeling equal tension between 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, as well as equal tension between the shoulder blades and the tailbone, pressing equally into the mat. And that will help you define neutral position. Okay. Now, supine position, it's easy to find neutral in supine position, but people who don't naturally have an S-shaped curved spine and have to adjust somewhere on the body to find neutral position, they're going to also have to adjust in all other positions, such as seated position, all fours, hands and knees position, sideline position, prone position, face down, as well as standing position. So think about all these alignment cues, for instance, in standing position. Feet, once again, hip width apart, toes spread apart wide, all 4 corners of the feet in contact with the floor or mat, knees unlocked, tailbone points down toward the floor, so the gluteal muscles are slightly contracting, abdominal muscles engaged, shoulders over the hips, eyes forward so that the head is in correct alignment with the spine. Think about a straight line from head to tailbone. Shoulders retracted slightly in a comfortable position. So think about all these alignment cues in a variety of positions that you work in throughout your daily activities, as well as when you're designing your class. So we talked about the triangle method, and we talked about 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, as well as standing position and being in neutral. Now let's say, for instance, someone says, it's uncomfortable for me to be in this neutral position. I would say, well, are you uncomfortable because maybe you're not used to being in this position and you're feeling muscles working that you haven't felt before? If they say, yeah, that's what it is, I'm uncomfortable, then I would say, stay there. Because over time, when you're working, moving in and out of neutral position, it becomes more comfortable. In fact, when you actually find neutral position, it feels like that's the place you should be. You feel like you are correctly aligned in neutral position. But if someone says, well, it's more than just being uncomfortable here, my back hurts. What you might want to do is take a towel and place that towel maybe underneath the back. Let's go ahead and lift.
Okay.
Is that in the lower back?
Yeah.
Okay. So does it feel like you're laying on the towel? It should feel quite comfortable, actually.
A lot
the
of support.
towel is actually forming the curve now. Okay. And for instance, if he has kyphosis and the forward head, you might want to take the towel and place it underneath the head. Okay. Either here, or I'm going to fold it again, because we quite often have to see this in class as well. And lower. How does that feel? That's,
comfy.
Yeah, it's going to help him to maintain that neutral position. So once again, work with the deviations, use props such as towels. And if someone just simply says, you know, I'm just not comfortable in this position. Maybe they had a previous back injury. Maybe the deviation is severe. Maybe they had back surgery. Then bring them as close to neutral as you can. Because once again, we want to feel mild tension, but we never want to experience pain, strain, or discomfort, okay? How do you feel?
Great.
Okay?
Yeah, I can
aligned?
take a nap.
Yeah. All right.
And then I guess imprint.
Imprint position. Yeah. Okay. Now, our imprint position is very important with our Pilates-based exercises. And typically, when the legs are elevated, both legs, if you don't have strong core muscles, we tend to see that maybe the back arches. Or people are saying, wow, I really feel this in my lower back, pain, stress or strain. So imprint position would be the ideal position when legs are elevated. So Carlos, I'm going to take Carlos to imprint position, but I'm going to leave out intentionally one very important cue, probably the most important cue. All right? Okay. So Carlos, feet hip width apart. Knees hip width apart. Reach your fingertips down toward your heels. Slide your shoulder blades down away from your ears. Head correctly aligned with the spine. And find neutral position, curve 1. Are your shoulder blades pressed? Curve 2. Slide the hand under the lower back. Oh, it's there. Curve 3. Triangle is in frontal plane. Yeah? All right, now let's imprint. Carlos, press your upper back firmly into your mat.
Okay.
Okay, I can see the muscles contracting. Press your mid back firmly into your mat.
Okay.
I can see. And now press your lower back firmly into your mat. So imagine you are lying in sand, pressing each and every vertebra into the sand. That would be our imprint position. But I would guess right now that Carlos is contracting his gluteal muscles, the muscles in the bottom. Yeah? Because they tend to take over. So go back to neutral. Curve 1. Curve 2, shoulder blades. Curve 3, it's here, I can see it. And the triangle in frontal plane. All right. Press your upper back firmly into your mat. Press the mid back. Now, relax your gluteal muscles, the muscles in the bottom, and press the lower back. Now it's all core work. All the core muscles now are doing the work. A lot of those smaller muscles now are working, okay, as stabilizers. And this would be our imprint position. So I like to teach the imprint position early on in class so that later on when we begin to elevate the legs, such as this tabletop position, I can cue imprint position, okay? And if you're unable to imprint, perhaps the lower back is lifting off the mat, then I would cue bring one or both feet back down to your mat and find that imprint position.
Okay, great. Yeah. The thing that I also feel when I go into imprint, Lisa, is not just the back muscles engaged going into the floor, but the obliques kicking in, the rectus abdominis and the obliques doing some of the work because, again, we look at where they're attached in the front. And if you bring these 2 points together, the pelvis to the rib cage, which is putting the pelvis in a posterior tilt, we're going to engage from also the front muscles.
That's right.
Of the torso. So I think of it also as not just the back muscles doing the work, but the obliques and the rectus abdominis and the transverse kicking in as well.
That's right. And as Carlos mentioned earlier, when we think about the core, well, he said it earlier, if you were to ask your class participants, point to your core, where is your core? Most class participants will do this. Right here. But the core is actually from the shoulders down to the hips, all the muscles front of body and back of the body. So you're absolutely right in that we want to make sure that we are contracting, engaging all of those core muscles, the obliques, the transverse abdominis, scapular muscles, pelvis muscles, all the core muscles, in that imprint position.
Okay, great. So I think the last section we want to cover is the core stabilization part of our manual on page 14 through 17. And some of these areas we've already covered with the postural deviations, but let's go through this a little bit more into detail in terms of what is affected by the muscular imbalances in some of these. So the major areas of the core we're going to address are the scapular area first, and then the torso, the back muscles, and the front of the muscles, front of the torso, the abdominals, and then the pelvis muscles here. So when we look at muscular imbalance, it's coming from, again, whether there's too many emphasis of muscle strength opposed to the flexibility of our muscles. Core stability is defined as when the torso muscles all work together synergistically to maintain a certain position while a desired activity is performed. And that's what all these exercises are doing. We're asking the torso to create this stability in a position to hold it while we're moving the legs or the arms or both. And when we look at the scapular area, let's go ahead and have you turn around the scapular area. Then we talked about the rhomboid muscles sometimes kicking in too much, where you've got the winging part of an alignment here. And you've got sometimes more of the kyphotic look, where you've got the roundness of the back, where the serratus muscles are now working too much. And there's an imbalance of the two working together to place these scapulas, bones, the girdle, as well as the clavicle area, in place. So if you look at the way that the scapula sit on the rib cage, they actually have these little pockets that they sit into, and they want to be flush to the rib cage here. So if you're seeing too much winging, you've got too much rhomboids working and not enough serratus muscles to put them back into neutral. And again, if you've got too much of the kyphotic look, you've got too much serratus muscles working and not enough of the rhomboids kicking in. And you also got what we call the imbalance of the flexibility of the opposing muscle groups in the front to the back. So if you've got the rhomboid muscles kicking in too much and you've got this winging position, you've got a lot of stretching here in the front of the torso. So we need to strengthen these muscles, the pectorals and the serratus muscles and the shoulders. And then if you've got too much of the kyphotic look, then we've got the flexibility component of being too tight in the front of the torso. So we need to open you up and get more of the pectorals and the anterior delts to open up in the front. Then you've got the torso. Let's talk about, again, the rectus abdominis and the obliques and how it's important to keep rib cage placement in position in terms of what we talked about here. Because I was able to put my mid back in the floor because I had a tactile cue to this. But when we're standing, or sitting in positions or sideline positions in these exercises, we don't have that comfort zone. And so what we see is the sprain of the rib cage. And this is coming from weak abdominal muscles here. So we look at how to strengthen this to create a better position of the thoracic area of the spine. And then you've got the erector spinae, as we know, can be tight and overworked because some of us stand all day. Or we have the tightness and the curvature of the lower back going the opposite direction, which we see more commonly sometimes with a posterior tilt. And we do see this in guys, actually. Guys have a little bit more of a posterior tilt. And that comes from a tightness of the hamstrings pulling the pelvis back. And so that needs to be addressed in terms of how do we move this back into neutral? How do we get these ASIS bones facing the front? Because they're going to be actually facing which way? They go, when a posterior tilt happens, the SAS joint bones go up.
They point up. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'll turn to the side. It's a little easier to see. And then the ASIS bones point
go up. So we need to stretch these puppies of over here, these hamstrings, and get them to open up more and allow that pelvis to go back into neutral. So the pelvis is affected by a lot of the muscles here in the pelvic area, which is also addressed through the gluteus maximus. It's also addressed through the inner and outer thigh muscles that we talked about. And those rotators kicking in too much can also cause deviations in the hips and problems in the lower back, referred pain. So we need to work our clients in parallel position quite a bit now, because they have a tendency to do what? They're going to turn out.
Externally rotate, and
Right.
some people internal.
Internal,
But
which we do see. We do see.
More so external, though, I would
Right.
say.
More so, and it's funny because when you actually place people in parallel position, to them it feels like they're pigeon-toed. They go, God, my God, it doesn't feel like I'm actually parallel. I feel like I'm turning in.
Knees turning,
But it's,
right.
you can feel the difference in the muscles, and the legs work differently when you put them in parallel position, because the internal muscles of the leg kick in, the adductors. So we address all these areas, and this is the key thing when we're looking at our exercises. These are the key areas that we're going to look at in all of our exercises. Cervical placement, where is the head placed, and should it be in flexion, extension, or neutral? Where are the shoulder blades placed in the positions of the exercises? Are they in their pockets? Are they winging? Are they protracting, which is in that kyphotic look? Where are the shoulders in relationship to the ears? Are they away from the ears when you're asking them to move the arms in arm movement? You're looking at rib cage placement. Is the rib cage in place before we execute a movement? And if it's not, how do we close the rib cage? We talked about this in terms of the abdominal work. And we're looking at the pelvic placement. Where is the pelvis in space in terms of spinal alignment? Is it in neutral? Do we have them in imprint? Is it in a posterior tilt to begin with? We never really want to go into an anterior tilt in any of these exercises because it's taking them out of neutral. So these are the areas that I look at in terms of a group setting, and how to identify deviations within the exercises that are going to cause problems in the execution of the exercise or create risk in terms of injuries. So I look at cervical placement, shoulder placement, rib cage placement, pelvic placement, scapular placement, and correct them right away within seconds, because I'll say, Beth, get your shoulders back and down, get it away from the ears. Lynn, get the rib cage placed in, use your abdominals more. Jack, your head's falling back. You need to get more into the flexors of your neck to put the neck in where we wanted it, whether it's in flexion or people in plank, first thing they do, they drop their heads. And so we have to always cue where the cervical placement. These are the things that I look at. And of course, the last thing, the fifth thing, is the breath. Are they breathing in these exercises? And those 5 things is what we look at. And these are the 5 things that I was taught in my Pilates certification to look for in all the exercises: breath, cervical placement, rib cage placement, shoulder and scapular placement, and pelvic placement. If you look at those 5 areas in your exercises, you're going to execute these exercises much safer and much more effective. Is there anything that you can add on in terms of some of this? Why is it that we see more back problems now? I mean, we always get this in terms of our students coming, I've got lower back issues. Why are we seeing this more and more, especially at an earlier age?
Yeah, a lot of the kids now with the very heavy, 50-pound backpacks on their backs now. Right. And people on computers for several hours per day. I mean, think about it. The majority of the things that we do throughout our daily activities are forward. We eat forward, we drive forward on computers, at a desk, on the phone. Yeah.
I think
and those heavy backpacks.
People are more sedentary. They're not doing as much. I mean, you and I grew up in an era where we did a lot more outside. We didn't have computers. I didn't have computers.
Text messaging.
They're text messaging. They're sitting PlayStations. They're sitting. They're not out there being as active as we were when we were kids. So again, it's causing these problems at an earlier age. And then because they go into the workforce sitting right into a computer, then they're going to exacerbate these areas that are going to be a problem where some of us started not getting problems till we were in the late 30s, early 40s. Now we're starting to see them in their early 20s. I'm seeing it a lot in our studio where younger people are coming to us because they have these issues at an earlier stage of their life, as opposed to as we get older because of just gravity pull on the spine. That was what the problem was in our era, is that it was gravity giving us a problem. We were active. And so I see more and more of that coming into play with our exercises, and how it's so important that we now, when these exercises were developed, like I said, Joseph Pilates came up with these exercises back when we didn't sit at a computer. People were more active. And so we have to give these modifications to these exercises that he developed. And that is where I think is the key for all of this, is to make it safe. Also, I find that people have a difficult time finding neutral in different positions. It's not necessarily having to be in a seated position that they have a problem because of the tightness of the hamstrings. They'll have a hard time in side-lying positions as well, whereas some of us don't have that problem.
Right.
So it varies from student to student when you see this, how some of us can get into neutral right away and others just have a much more difficult time with it, depending on where they're at in space with these exercises.